Hi, I'm Karen. We're here at Montevilla Sewing Center, and today we're going to talk about overcasting on the Janome 6700. Now, when you're overcasting something that's thick like denim, it's easy to, you just push overcast like your zigzag, there you go. You're good to go. But what about your thinner fabric that tends to kind of scrunch up at the edges? You can see how I used a wide zigzag and how it's kind of folded over the edge. You don't really want to have that. Especially when you go to iron it, you're going to get a bit of a ridge there. You want a nice flat edge. So how do you do that? Well, in your book, it talks about various overcasting stitches that you can do. You can use your A foot and do a 3-step zigzag. You can, and that would be right up here, 6. It's a little slower than doing a regular zigzag because it's got those 2 stitches in the middle. So it's going to slow things down a little bit. You can also do one of these overcasting stitches using the M foot. Here's the M foot right here. It has these little wires right there. And the purpose of those wires is to keep a little bit extra slack in the thread, and so it keeps the thread from pulling the edge of the fabric and keeps it flat. And it also has this little guide right here to run the edge of your fabric here, and I'll show you that in a minute. Now the overcasting stitches, 13, 14, 15, and 16, and you can see those in mode 2. I'm going to go to mode 2 right there. We're going to page ahead a little bit until we have that. There we go. Those stitches right there. Those are good for seaming and overcasting. Let's say you wanted to do a fairly narrow seam. You got fairly tightly woven fabric, but you don't want to have a lot of seam allowance showing. Those are good for that. But because they are both seam and overcast, you're going to get a lot of back and forth motion of the feed dogs, which is fine for what seaming and overcasting both. But if you're simply wanting to overcast, that's going to slow things down a lot. So how do we use a zigzag and the M foot? I'm going to show you. So to start with, we're going to take off the regular foot, and if you want, you can do your lockout key, that's fine too. Put this M foot on here, lower the feed dog, put it on there. Now, if I was just going to do a regular zigzag, okay, let's go back to mode 1 again here. Regular zigzag. If I started zigzagging, the needle is going to hit one or more of those little wires that's in there. So what you want to do is make your zigzag wider. So you want it to be as wide as it can be. Go right up here to 9. So now what it's going to do is it will go on either side of those wires and put some slack into the thread as you're sewing. You'll notice the furthest rightmost wire is actually out past the edge of your guide there. That's okay, because what that does is it gives that extra slack, and you won't really notice it in the final product. So when you start sewing, this is your M, your zigzag that has the M on it. That means you widen and narrow it, and it widens and narrows from the middle outwards. The one that says R, you'll see in your whole thing here, that means it stays the same on the right and it widens and narrows to the left. L means it stays the same on the left and widens and narrows to the right. I've experimented with those two. Neither one of those is good for what we're doing here. Just use the M, the one with the M on the middle, and widen it to 9 millimeter. Now it's going to start out with, I'm going to go slow so you can kind of see what I'm doing. It's going to start out with a locking stitch, and then it does your zigzag. And see where the needle is way out past there, but that's okay. Because as it sews, those threads are going to join right up, and what you're actually going to need to watch is the edge of this in relation to the little guide. That's where you're going to want to watch, because you don't want it under the guide, you don't want it bubbling up against it, and you also don't want a space there. So just watch that right there, and of course I can speed things up. And you can see it's fairly quick to do this, because it's only going forward. It's a zigzag going forward instead of zigzag and going back and forth and get a little stretch there and a little extra seaming there. You don't really need that for this purpose. Now, if you're going to do a locking stitch, make sure you're doing a locking stitch in the fabric, not out in the air. So my last, the needle drop is right there in the fabric. I'm going to do my locking stitch like this. And it does a locking stitch right there. I have it set for automatic cut after the stitching. Pull that off, and there we go. Now that is not going to fray. I used contrast thread just to show what it looks like, but I could have used the same color. But see how nice and flat that edge is compared to this one over here where it's all curled up. And if I turn this under, went to iron it, it's nice and smooth. So that's how you would use this to make your edges nice and flat. Now, I have a serger, and so if I was going to seal my edges, this is how I would do it. But let's say I had the wrong color of thread in my serger, and I wanted to just do this. I just pop this foot on, press 5, make sure that my stitch width is all the way up to 9. So, another thing I wanted to show you about this is if you are stitching, these little wires are connected on the front of the foot, but they allow the stitches to form over those wires, and then they're not connected on the back. So if you're going to start sewing, let's say you start sewing, here you go, and you're all done, and you cut your threads. Then you pull your fabric out to the side. It doesn't want to pull out because the stitches are still on those wires. So just pull it towards the back. It'll slide right off. Okay, so that's basic overcasting. Always remember when you're using any kind of foot that has something in the stitch window there, always test your stitch, get past the locking stitch that it automatically does at the beginning, and test the cycle of the stitch to make sure that the needle's not going to hit any of those wires or anything in that stitch window. So if you've enjoyed this video, give us a thumbs up. If you have comments or questions, you can leave them in the area down below. We have lots of other videos on this machine. It's a great, useful machine. I really love it. So stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Bye.